Well, good afternoon and welcome to this session. Welcome to all the colleagues in the room and of course to all the participants who are with us today online. As you know, it's a hybrid conference, and we have many colleagues around the world who are actually following the conference online. So I'm David Achoena, I'm the director of the UNESCO Institute for Lifelong Learning, UL, and welcome to this session on the role of higher education institutions for lifelong learning. Actually, this session will be an opportunity for us to share some of the findings of a research program that we initiated 2 years ago, precisely on this topic, exploring what is the stage of engagement today of lifelong learning institutions in the field of lifelong learning. And we are fortunate to have a number of distinguished speakers with us today. And I would like to welcome Mr. Wei Jia, President of Shanghai Open University, who is with us today online. And I'd like to also mention the fact that SOU has been a very strong partner of UL in developing and conducting this work on universities and lifelong learning. I'd like also to introduce Professor Bud Oh, who is with us here in Barcelona today, who is co-chair on the community-based research and social responsibility in higher education at the University of Victoria, and also a co-chairholder of the University of UNESCO chair on this topic. And we have also online today Minister Edna Bonilla-Silva, Secretary of Education of the city of Bogota in Colombia, and we are also very pleased to have her with us for this session. I'd like also to welcome Michael Goebel, Director of the Higher Education Policy Unit at the European University Association, an association which has been doing a lot of work for actually promoting also the engagement of universities in Europe in higher education. So we'll very much look forward to hear from you, Michael, on this topic. To introduce the session and open our discussion, I would first like to share with you some of the findings of the work that we have been doing on this topic, both through a number of case studies, but also through an international survey that was jointly conducted with the International Association of Universities, IAU, to actually provide, I would say, an update on the engagement of universities throughout the world in providing lifelong learning. And I will share with you, sorry for this technical, I will share with you the outcome of this work. So first of all, I'd like to stress the fact that lifelong learning is an important concept for universities, and in doing that, sorry, we have a little technical challenge. I would like to recall, how we actually conceptualize lifelong learning at UNESCO, to again stress the fact that lifelong learning means lifelong learning means learning for all ages, but it also relates to this life-wide, dimension of learning. Learning in all settings and for all purposes of life. So this is really this dual definition of lifelong learning that UNESCO is promoting. And when looking at how universities engage in lifelong learning, we are also actually considering those two dimensions. It's not a new topic for universities, and we'll hear probably so from Michael that this has been on the agenda, for instance, in Europe for several decades. But we believe that the adoption of SDG 4 in 2015 gave actually a new impetus to this topic and a new, I would say, rationale, maybe a new obligation for universities to actually define themselves and see themselves also as key institutions to contribute to providing lifelong education to all. So I'd like to maybe go with you through a number of key questions that we've tried to actually explore through this international survey. And the first one being actually what are the essential factors which are needed to actually forge an engagement of higher education institutions in favor of lifelong learning. And the first dimension that we looked at was actually the connection, if any, between the national framework, the national policy framework, and the engagement of institutions in providing lifelong learning. And you see from that slide that actually there is a correlation between the two dimensions, and the fact that countries have developed a policy framework encouraging universities to engage in lifelong learning has proved to be a very important, I would say, incentive for universities to do so. So there is actually a link between this enabling environment and the actual engagement of universities. So that's something to listen to actually remember in terms of the policy framework that can be developed. Another important question that was asked was about funding. Funding is also, of course, key for universities to engage. What are the sources of funding? And again, we have here a diversity of responses showing also the plurality of sources of funding for promoting lifelong learning in universities. It's important, however, to note that tuition fees appear as the number one source of funding for universities to develop those programs, as well as targeted and earmarked resources in universities' budget. So I think this is again something that must call for how actually schemes to provide the support to individual learners can actually contribute and facilitate the access to higher education institutions. Another question that was posed relates to this notion of non-traditional students or non-traditional learners, which is key, I would say, and a way to also reflect and describe the diversification of participation in higher education. And if we look again at the response, we see that for a large majority of institutions, the target groups that have been accessing through those programs are actually those who need upskilling and re-skilling competencies. So that's interesting. It shows also, the connection between the engagement of universities and the transformation of the labor market. And again, the engagement of employers, but also government, to facilitate access of workers to such programs is very important, and also a very important source of income for universities to engage. Now, in terms of the partnership between local stakeholders and universities. And again, this is something that we're going to see with Basil's presentation. We see that, in fact, a large majority of universities that responded do actually have some sort of partnerships with local stakeholders, but the majority of them through a very, I would say, light form of engagement, in particular, mainly through offering public lectures and workshops. So this is something that, again, is interesting, but shows also that there is probably room for actually developing a more structural, a more strategic engagement with the universities and local actors, probably local governments, and also local employers. Now we're going to actually, deepen this discussion and look more precisely at the landscape of engagement of universities in lifelong learning through listening to our distinguished speakers. And I would like first to invite Professor Jia from Shanghai Open University to actually give us a perspective on how in China, one of the very, I would say, and fast-growing area in terms of higher education development, what has been the role of open universities to actually sustain that growth and contribute to offering lifelong learning to learners in China. President Jia, welcome to this session. You have the floor.
谢谢，尊敬的朱雷纳先生，尊敬的哈尔先生。
Distinguished Mr. David Archuleta, Mr. Bud Hall, Ms. Edna Saba, Mr. Michael Gable, ladies and gentlemen, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to you. First of all, I'd like to give my great appreciation to Mr. David Archuleta and for this great opportunity and to discuss with you the topic of how to transform the higher education institution to the lifelong learning institution. We know that in the current stage, with the ICT development and progress, we have much more need for lifelong learning. Also, on the other hand, we're faced with the challenges and opportunities for lifelong learning. So, with the URL, the SOU have carried out research program based on the data assessment, and we have also achieved great results. And at the SOU, we have been exploring the ways to better carry out the lifelong learning. So in the next 10 minutes or so, I'm going to talk to you about our explorations and practices in building the university into a lifelong learning platform. So in China, we have two dominant education systems. One is the national education system and also the system for lifelong learning. So in our national education system, we have the preschool education, primary education, secondary and higher education. So with the massification of higher education in China, with the gross enrollment rate reaching 57.8% in 2021, the learning needs have shifted from academic purpose to the sustainable development of knowledge and skills. And lifelong learning has been an important approach to achieve education for sustainable development. In the lifelong learning, the universities not only need to fulfill their academic purposes, but also mobilize the stakeholders to fulfill the learning needs of multiple and diverse learners. And we not only give importance to the academic education, but also to upskilling and reskilling. So at Shanghai Open University, as a new type of higher education institution, we were established as the Shanghai TV University previously in 1960s, with the aim of providing compensation education for adult learners. And as Shanghai is building into a city for lifelong learning, and also to fulfill the demands of the citizens, in 2012, we were renamed as Shanghai Open University, what we're now. And we provide academic education, non-academic education, community education for adult learnings, supported by ICT, and we aim to promote lifelong learning for all. So the goal for the university is really to accelerate in the building of establishing ourselves as an open university and providing more flexible ways of learning and a more broad range of background of the learners in order to help them reskill and upskill and find good job opportunities for themselves. So in our transformations, we have explored several practices. In terms of the mission, from the traditional higher education, we transformed ourselves into a lifelong learning and lifelong development institution. From the education institution for academic and professional development, we provided more services to self-improvement for learners with different backgrounds. And we provided not only higher academic education, but a non-academic education plus community education. And from the governance of HIE, we built the Governance for Lifelong Learning service platform. Since last year, we have been conducting the research, and we have identified our goal to build a university or a platform for lifelong learning, which really aims to promote the learning capacity of the city of Shanghai. Well, Shanghai is an important platform for promoting and driving the learning capacity for the city, including new idea, new knowledge, and new skills, as well as we will integrate into the local development to contribute to the quality education, quality life, as well as quality management. So in this platform, or in this new type of university, we identified 4 key functions, including the strategies of lifelong development, national and municipal strategies, and we also strive to provide inclusive program and also build the innovative mechanism for educational resource, LLL research and analysis, RVA and branch school system. Moreover, we provide the technology support, including the LLL Resource Center. We built the LLL platform, smart learning support, and RVA code, and also platform for LLL research and analysis. So in the first hand, we target our target groups is for the non-traditional learners, including working people, people with disabilities, older people, and a diverse background of people. And the education system is carried out on 1 main campus and including 44 branch schools. We cooperate with the government, industries, enterprises, and other universities. And we also provide programs that focus on livelihood and industries. We provide 51 programs at the moment, and with 80,000 plus campus students. So as Shanghai is fighting against the COVID, we provide the online learning courses for this spring semester. We provided 829 online courses with more than 1,400 plus live streaming courses. So for the citizens, we also provide several learning centers for them. For instance, we have built this 15-minute learning circle where you can get access to the learning resources within 15 minutes of walk. So our aim is really to enhance the education for art, for finance, for technology capabilities of the citizens. And we also deliver more than 400 plus lifelong learning institutions in the city. Moreover, we also built the community learning centers, and a smart learning interaction online platform. Also, we provide the research and analysis of their learning outcomes. So just to show you some of the pictures of our community education centers. Next, I would like to talk also about the resource platform. Not only for the community, we also provide learning resources for people from all walks of life, from all industries. So we have our own educational TV station. We also have some new media resource channels to just give access to all types of citizens to get easy access to the education resources. And besides, we also built this RVA platform with wide access for lifelong learning. From 2012, we built the Shanghai Academic Credit Transfer and Accumulation Bank for lifelong learning. So we have this RVA code where they can really quantify their learning results and learning outcomes. So we have two phases of this mechanism. Now, for instance, we also hope to allow the students to really get credits for their learning outcomes and also for the older people. And apart from that, we also established a research and analysis platform for citizens. On this platform, we would analyze and assess the learning needs of the citizens and their learning capabilities. And this hopefully would provide more information on decision-making for further education. So in the past decades, these are some of the challenges and reflections we had. So with our transformation, we aim to provide more innovative, updated, and practical learning content. And in this ICT-driven era, we also aim to provide more extensive, flexible, and smart education reforms. And our learning tools would be more personal, professional, and more effective. And in terms of the learning services, we aim to provide more inclusive system and more open cooperation. So to achieve those goals, we are also looking at how to better provide the lifelong learning services. So this is the flywheel model we have developed. At the center is the learners. So learners, their needs are at the center of this model. And we have the training courses, inclusive education program development and teaching based on the learner's needs. And we are also enabled by the ICT support, and in this process, we constantly explore the driving force of the school, and also we are looking to work with the government to carry out better services and in order to meet the needs of the learners. So these are some of our practices at our school. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you, President Jia. I mean, this has been a very rich, very comprehensive presentation, which I think illustrates many of the, not only the challenges, but also the directions in terms of policies and strategies that we're going to discuss further today. How the mandate of universities in China and specifically in Shanghai have actually been enlarged from the research of academic excellence to also include the requirements for contributing to upskilling and reskilling of workers, but also how flexibility has been actually being also developed through a number of mechanisms. I took note of this very interesting initiative, the 15-minute learning circle that you have put in place in Shanghai to ensure that access to knowledge is actually available to all citizens within their immediate surrounding. An interesting also element that you introduced is actually the engagement of SOU, Shanghai Open University, in the broader program and strategy of Shanghai as a learning city, and how the university can also contribute to local development, of course, at a very large scale in Shanghai. I noted, this outreach to 5.4 million learners, so we are really talking about a very impressive scale. But I think that this path where the university is also contributing to the strategies developed by the city within the learning city strategy is a very interesting perspective, which is also going to be illustrated in a very different but also quite interesting context by Secretary of State Edna Bonilla Seva from the city of Bogota in Colombia. So, Secretary of State, I would like to invite you to take the floor.
Bueno, muy buenos días. No sé si me están.
Good morning. I wonder if you can hear me well. Thank you very much for the invitation. Thank you very much to UNESCO for placing higher education at the center of the agenda, especially at a time when we're going through a pandemic that has given us many lessons learned and opportunities in terms of education. So I'd like to thank my fellow panelists, and I'm going to show you a presentation. May you please confirm that it is visible? Well, I was invited to speak about the role of local governments in the case of Bogota, what we have done in order that higher education institutions work for an education that lasts for the whole of the life of human beings in the city. So the presentation has been divided around three topics. Firstly, to understand how higher education works in Colombia, the role of local agencies, the lessons that have been learning in Bogota, not only to improve the coverage, but also the quality of higher education, and final comments. So this is the context of our higher educational system in Colombia. So we have the Ministry of Education, which is in charge of functioning, surveillance, and inspection about the quality of higher education in Colombia. Usually local governments have competences that can be limited, but this does not mean to say that we cannot encourage higher education. The Ministry of Education sets out the rules and regulations, and also a very important aspect, which is funding of higher education. The Colombian system is hybrid between public institutions and many private ones. The funding of public universities is done mostly by the national government, and the national government is made up or has the participation of all of the steering committees of universities. We believe that this is a great opportunity and important information so that you can briefly get to know our higher educational system. We have enrollment according to levels of education. Most of it is university education. To us in Bogota, this accounts for a major challenge because, as we said before, we have to keep on progressing, and it is important for us to see technical education as a major opportunity for youngsters. And when we divide this by sectors, we see that 51% is public publicly provided, and private education accounts for 49%. We have 8 million people living in Bogota, the capital of the country, which accounts for most of the students in higher education in the country, approximately 30%. But we have a dramatic situation in terms of young men and women face in terms of education. Only 4 of every 10 people who finish their basic education have access to higher education. So there is a major access problem, and this is a hindrance in the market base. And what you see in the slide is a transition in our higher education system. What we can see is that of every 100 children who go into primary school, when we look at their history in education, only 6 end up working in what they studied at university. The rest of them are lost in the educational system. And we have had a crisis in society during the pandemic, and the highest unemployment rate is concentrated around women and young people. Because of this situation, what we have seen is try to determine how we can work with higher education institutions, with the different actors, in order to improve higher education. And in this regard, we have established our new plan for the 21st century. We understood that we cannot leave the responsibility about higher education in the hands of the national government. We have to have better articulation in order to provide better opportunities to the young men and women in the cities. We have 5 work fronts. One of them is funding. We understand that the taxes and levies imposed by the city should be oriented to strengthen education. So in terms of funding higher education, it is mainly in the hands of the national government, but we would like to receive major contributions in financial terms to education. Secondly, the scope of work, the educational provision is not made by the central government, but rather by the higher education institutions. So we work directly with universities so that we can have a joint work strategy. Bogota is working with 100% of the universities that are accredited and 100% of the public higher education institutions and 35% of the higher education institutions that are present in the city. So funding is contemplated by the strategic plan, and we have invested $247 million approximately in higher education directly in universities, and we are going through the city council a motion to raise this to $350 million in order to provide better university for youngers working with universities. But we have also understood that we have to run a dialogue and interaction with other actors. University has to be open to the young people who listens to them, but we also have to listen to what young people want for building their life projects, and we have to speak to the private sector. Sometimes it is a bit difficult for the state to play this role of facilitators of dialogues with universities and the youngsters and so on. So we listen to the expectations, the hardships with design programs, and we make a joint offer with higher education institutions. As to Workfronts, we have an agenda of research which is led by the universities of the city, the capital, and the country. We understand the role of the city. Science and technology is also funded by the state, and for the most part, for a minor part, by private institutions. But we are also making a bet in this funding and in this joint work. And fifthly, we have started with this pilot plan. We have to send signals to society about the fruits of joint work in order to improve quality. So I've brought to you 2 or 3 successful experiences and pilots in higher education. Firstly, when we listen to the youngsters in the city, we realize that often they don't have enough information in order to make their decisions about what they're going to study and their life project. So we're considering several strategies to implement in schools. We believe that if we work with children and with the youngsters by providing information, we will help them build their life projects, and the transition between school and university should be made a little easier. So we have these publications, and we are dealing with 1,200,000 youngsters per year, and we are monitoring this strategy. Additionally, we offer opportunities in universities. Currently, we have more than 20 people who are benefiting from this program called Jóvenes Reto a la U, to help them go to university, the ones they choose, offering them the best opportunities for them to make their life projects come true. And during the pandemic, the youngsters were suffering very much during that period of time. So we launched a program called Reto a la U, and we designed this at the peak of the pandemic so that the youngsters in universities, and we were helped by them in more than 40 universities, were designed short-term programs. Education has to be pertinent. University courses are quite long, usually 5 years. And what we wanted to create here was to create what we have called certifications, or very much practice-centered education in terms of what the young people, society, and corporations need. And so these youngsters who are in Reto a la U, we hope them to progress to university courses. And we have an unsatisfied demand at every contest. We have about 80,000 youngsters that want to take the exam, and we only can accept 10,000. And so the most important thing to us is to change higher education institutions into lifetime learning institutions where the youngsters go to and they build their projects of life. And we have understood that in order to do this, we have to get together as a society. We have to work by integrating local and national governments, higher education institutions, private corporations. We know that the young are not the future of cities, they're the present and future. So this has to be a well-integrated program with global visions. The funding has been very important, and this has shown that these youngsters can have this present and this future. And we believe that when we do joint work, the possibilities are much greater. And we hope that other actors, the national government and the private sectors all together may create opportunities for youngsters. Otherwise, results are not very good. This has to be lifelong learning, and we have to understand what the young men and women in the cities want. This is what the work that we have devoted ourselves to make this connection between actors and the opportunities found in the educational system. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias, señora Bonilla Seba.
Thank you very much, Madam, for your very rich presentation about the role of local governments. It was a very interesting presentation. And it also provides illustration about the importance of cooperation between the central government and city governments in order to bring about the change of universities into lifelong learning institutions. The issue of cooperation seems to be very important to me, and also the integration of public policies at a national level, integrate them with the local level.
To move to another presentation that also will illustrate, this link and the engagement of universities at the local level through a presentation by Professor Bud Hall, which will actually deepen how universities can engage with stakeholders within local communities.
Thank you very much, David. Thank you very much, Nora and Raul from the UNESCO Institute for Lifelong Learning. It's been a great pleasure for myself and my colleague Rajesh Tandon to be involved with you folks in I must say, a very thorough, a very beautiful piece of research over the last couple of years. And what I'd like to say is that in spite of the quite brilliant presentations for President Jean and from Secretary Bonilla, and the few perhaps controversial contributions I'll make, and I'm anticipating Mikhail's presentation, the actual report will be very rich and will have much more in it than a few of our comments can do today. So keep your eyes open. Perhaps David can tell us when and where we can see, more people can see the report. Several of us have seen it because we've been involved. So what we've heard are two, really remarkable examples of structures of provision. The Shanghai Open University, that model, multiple millions of people impact, being able to access, some aspect of higher learning through the really remarkable and inspiring creative imagination, organizational design of that open university is a fantastic model for delivery. The cooperation, as David was saying, the story from the Secretary General of Bogota in terms of how they have worked with the universities and the large numbers of students in that part of Colombia, the role of municipal, in this case local government, as a collaborative partner with higher education is again, beautifully illustrated by Secretary Bonilla's work. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what is happening these days. Let's see. Yeah, what is happening is, as David says, there's been, I would say in the last 10 or 15 years, quite a policy shift, quite a trend in higher education towards what people call an engaged university, or community university engagement, or partnerships, community university research partnerships. So there's in some ways there's a historic new contract being negotiated between society and higher education institutions. So I'm going to talk a little bit about, first of all, just to mark that trend, and with these statistics, and then I'm going to talk just a little bit about whose knowledge. We know how to deliver. We know which kinds of policies are needed. We know what kind of structures are needed. But what is the content? And there's also some surprises, not for everybody, but several of you may be surprised that there's quite an exciting conversation about whose knowledge counts that is emerging. So I wanted just to make the point about why is this, or what is happening in terms of universities and their communities. You know, we have the wonderful example of Shanghai, wonderful example of Bogota, and all of you will have these kinds of stories. There are in the world something like, it's a bit controversial, but something like 31,097 universities, and at least 220, some people say 270 million students, and trillions of dollars. It says just one singular, it should have an S. Trillions of dollars in research funding. So the idea is that there are extraordinary resources that with a slight shift of focus, a slight engagement can draw into a community, a municipality, a big city, or a smaller city, in the spirit of learning cities, in the spirit of collaborating, in the spirit of universities contributing to the social, ecological search for egalitarian and a more just society. And 220 million students, and when you talk to, as Rajesh and I do, when you speak to students and you talk to them, would you like to spend some time doing something meaningful? I don't mean just going out and painting the walls of a school or going out and cleaning the streets and coming back in, but would you like to spend time in communities and doing something meaningful? 80–90% of students say, we would love it. We would love it. Students are hungry for engagement. And our universities are slowly finding ways to enable that to happen. And some universities call it service learning. We call it, at my university, community engaged learning. And this is happening. Their universities have access to money. They have access to research networks that could be of great value. But we have to move beyond a university simply being something located in a community. A lot of people drive from their home through parts of the community, go to work at the university, and they don't actually know what's in between their home and the university. They just know it's a geographic area. But with a bit of attention, and so this movement, community university engagement movement, which this study sheds a light on, is quite an interesting one, and is one of the important trends these days. The second question, though, we talk about whose knowledge counts, and when we talk about sharing knowledge, if we don't start thinking about whose knowledge counts, we're going to end up reproducing, knowledge partnerships, relations of power in the world that really have brought us to this stage in time, this brink, where we're actually quite worried about our survival. We're quite worried about increased inequality in the world. We're quite worried about increases in gender violence and many, many other factors. So this map, you may say, what kind of map is that? What kind of map is that? This is a map that is scaled based on the production of knowledge. So you can see, in this case, it's a limited idea of the production of knowledge. This is the formal production of knowledge. This is academic books, academic journals, websites, and all of those kinds of things, those formal spaces where knowledge is created. And the size of the countries, or the size of the continents, is indicative of the percentage of knowledge production which are coming from those regions. So my country, Canada, is that dark blue thin thing, kind of a thin beret on the top of a great big thing over there, which is the US. rather thin thing down below, which is Mexico, and what looks like a bit of a lizard, that's Latin America. That's Latin America. If you look at Europe, you'll see that purple and blue, dark purple, all huge. It's taking up most of the center of the thing. This is when people talk about Eurocentric knowledge, and you wonder, what is that? What are they talking about, Eurocentric knowledge? Well, here's a graphic. It gives you an idea. And that rather thin thing hanging underneath it, which in reality is 4 or 5 times the size of Europe, and is where all human life began, which is Africa, is producing a very small proportion of global knowledge. You can see as you move over towards Asia, you can see different things. So I point that out because this is something that when we come together, on a global basis in a space like UNESCO, this is something that we need to keep in mind, that we may have the best instruments, the best structures for delivering knowledge, but whose knowledge is being delivered, and is some knowledge being excluded, and from this picture. So there's a notion, you've heard about the knowledge economy, and you find that many universities, governments will talk about the knowledge economy, that you have to be producing flexible, skilled, knowledgeable young people in order to plug into the global assembly line. And that's been a useful conversation, but it's been most useful for people concerned with markets or national competition. It hasn't been very useful for those of us who are interested in democratizing knowledge, spreading knowledge, getting more and more people involved. The other concept which you hear a little bit about is knowledge society, which is a better concept. It's about what forms of knowledge are supportive of helping us to deepen democracy. We certainly need that these days. But a third, the limitation of the concept of knowledge society is it does not question whose knowledge, which knowledge. So the concept that's growing now, and one which undergirds a lot of the work that Dr. Tandon and I do, is this idea called knowledge democracy. And knowledge democracy refers to a number of factors. You hear these words, you hear a lot of these words, many of you will have heard most of these words. Decolonization of knowledge, the idea that knowledge has been the dominant basis of knowledge in universities is a Eurocentric knowledge of about 500 years, not too old. And that if we're going to move forward in our universities, our universities don't need to look all like the curriculum in Oxford or Cambridge or MIT or Yale. They may look very different in other parts of the world. You hear the concept of co-construction of knowledge, which is the idea that people construct knowledge every day through experiential learning. Every day, most of the knowledge in the world is in fact produced by people in their everyday struggles. But we don't recognize that knowledge as science. We recognize that as something else. So you hear the word engaged scholarship more and more. There's journals now of engaged scholarship, and this is that, calling on or giving ourselves permission to engage with society. Rajesh, Dr. Tandon, and I, we use a lot of names for this stuff, but our UNESCO chair is about community-based participatory research. And you hear people like the Portuguese sociologist Boaventura de Sousa Santos, who talks about ecologies of knowledge. His point is that we will not have global social justice until we have epistemological justice. That it'll be impossible for us to evolve to a more egalitarian relationship depending only on Eurocentric science. And finally, this idea of multiple epistemologies. Let's see what my last slide is. Yeah. So this is, to give you an idea, maybe this is a classroom. Maybe this is a classroom. And my friend George Openjuru, who's the vice chancellor at Google University, he had a call one day from the security guard down at the gate of his college. And there were a bunch of people dressed more or less like these folks. And they were at the gate of his university, and he got this call. And he said, yes, I'm busy. What is it? And they told him, there are wizards at the gate. There are wizards at the gate. And George, who's committed to, to indigenous knowledge and to learning from community, he said, those are my wizards. So I leave you this as a, perhaps a bit provocative, but as the idea that classrooms of the future might as well look like something like that as something like we're standing in right now. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bud, for this presentation, and also for ending by actually giving us a very powerful illustration of the concept of open learning and open education. But in your presentation, you actually introduced a very important dimension of discussion around the future of higher education, and also how institutions of higher education can contribute to lifelong learning through this reflection about knowledge and whose knowledge is important. And we'll see maybe in the discussion to what extent this transformation of higher education institutions into institutions of lifelong learning can contribute to open, diversified source of knowledge, and contribute eventually also to not only equitable access to higher education and to knowledge, but also maybe to social justice. So thank you, Badal, and I'd like now to give the floor to Michael Goebel from the European Association of Universities, who is going, I think, to share with us many of the rich insights of universities in Europe on this important topic. Michael.
Thank you, David, and good afternoon. So you had already 3 very inspiring and thought-provoking presentations. I will try to keep that short. Probably an explanation, as David said, I'm speaking from a European background, and you should keep that in mind. So predominantly publicly funded higher education institutions, at global scale, a relatively high participation in higher education. Depending on where you are, it's from plus 20% to up to 70%, so quite diverse across Europe. Widening participation has been a topic across Europe increasingly. We may not have solved all the issues there, but the levels of awareness have been grown over the past decade. And also, of course, because many of our societies are aging, so that changes a little bit your perspective of who you want to educate and for what purposes. So I say that because that explains where our universities are today. When you ask about the lifelong learning contribution of the university, so I would just bluntly say all of them do it. Yeah? Regardless to what university you go in Europe, you will find somewhere lifelong learning. It falls probably, I could talk about 3 different strands there. One is really these widening access, the range of learners, dissemination knowledge, and working also with community, or as we say more, society, contribution to society. So this ranges from enabling access to children universities, high flyer program for secondary schools, third age universities, and an end. Then there's this trend, and that has been very much emphasized by national governments, but also by the European Union, is delivering skills for the labor market. So continued professional development, upskilling, reskilling, again, you have the full range from people who come in, who are vet graduates but need an upgrade into higher education, to people who want to be retrained or enhance their skills, up to probably preparing them for research. And that brings me to my third one then, and this is one that is often overlooked, but that's probably increasingly important, is that the university also educates its members. I mean, that's evident for students, but increasingly that becomes an issue for staff. So it's clear about digital skills, interpersonal skills, increasingly also about teachers learning and teaching. A decade ago, we had still in many systems the PhD or whatever degree you had was the license to teach, and nowadays this is no longer sufficient. And but it also goes in areas like research management, management of research infrastructure. Where do you get the skills? We are moving there from simply self-trained and training by doing more to training provision at the level of the university. And obviously these three pillars or strands, they kind of overlap. My second point here is probably that if you look at the universities, you do not necessarily recognize that they are lifelong learning institutions. It's not on the front page. You have to go a bit deeper, click yourself through the website, and it is of course different depending on the mission. So what we saw from Shanghai University, that we also have in Europe, we have open universities, and lifelong learning is their bread and butter. But this is not, I have to do it without my notes. But this is, of course, just a small part of the sector. And evidently we have these more college type of institutions which often work closely with local economies, deliver skills, more professional training and. But I think at most of the institutions, it's not something that is particularly visible. It's a kind of side activity. And if you look at it, universities are also not assessed for this. You all know by what universities are assessed. It's mainly their research contribution, but not what they do in learning and teaching, and certainly not what they do in lifelong learning. So what you will discover then when you look at the structures, that their lifelong learning contribution is not necessarily mainstreamed. And you have probably the very different approaches from a second dimension there, very much in parallel to the regular university. There is a kind of annexed university for lifelong learning, or you have also initiatives that are driven by individual department or even individual colleagues who are committed to it. It also makes that your model is not really aligned with what you do in the institution. To give you one example, finance, for example, could work completely differently. I mentioned that many institutions are publicly funded, so probably they offer bachelor education and even master's education for free. But if you offer the same or similar degrees for lifelong learners, you may have you may have to do that at full cost, and so charge almost international prices for that. And the same goes, I could make it for QA is different. They're often taught by different types of teachers, and they also have a different management. So they're not fully integrated, not fully aligned, not fully visible. And as a matter of fact, because this is so diverse and every university does something quite different, also in response, of course, to local needs, it's very difficult for us to assess. So we are looking really forward to your report, David, also, because it's some time ago that we asked our member institutions on how they're doing on lifelong learning. But it's really something where it is difficult to get an overview of what exactly they do. The next point that I want to make here is that we have seen a gradual transformation in the institution towards lifelong learning. And I have to say there were periods where we were very, very much hopeful. That was probably around between 2008 and 2012, where we saw that many institutions developed lifelong learning strategies. We had a lifelong learning charter that was developed by my organization on invitation of the French EU presidency at the time. The European Commission emphasized lifelong learning very strongly. And then afterwards, the direction changed a bit, and we talked a lot about skills that you could get everywhere in an end. But what we could see over the past years, there has been a trend towards more flexible education. And this is not only, but also for lifelong learners, I would say. So there's increasing demand for flexibility also for the group of school graduates, but increasingly also you try to cater to a diverser group of learners. And you can also see that the learning provision has changed. So we have policies now for recognition of prior learning, for example. There are new instruments like student learning portfolios, more outcome-based learning, and of course, there is more and more institutions offer short courses, have online provisions, open learning. You all know about the MOOCs, which are quite popular across Europe. And institutions also started to look at their students more as lifelong learners, both with regards to getting them self-learning, life-learning competences, but also in order to see them as returning learners. I think that's still an idea or an ideal probably. I'm not sure that we see it yet at many institutions, but more and more institutions try to keep in touch with alumni and have them back actually. You can see some of this actually became more clear in the COVID-19 crisis, where we have seen in international comparison that Europe had probably the steepest increase in higher education participation in that time. So you could see people who were out of job or were temporarily unemployed, they went back to higher education institutions. And I think it all stands all of this is also delivered, what happens then, lifelong learning, often delivered in collaboration with professional associations and partly also with for-profit, of course, providers, which of course make a big part of the adult education market in Europe. So their higher education institutions clearly not have the monopoly. And we can see that this is all more looked at, not just from universities provide excellent learning, but more from the perspective on how can universities become socially more relevant and contribute to society. We put that last year into a strategy which we called the Universities Without Walls. That's more a goal. It doesn't describe yet the state of play. The last point that I want to make here, and I think that's really important, that if we want to succeed in lifelong learning, we have to go beyond individual institutions. So we emphasize very strongly the autonomous institution and the individuality of institutions. But I think this is really a point where an individual in university can contribute, but it might not offer it all. That is when you look at how to match offer and demand. How do you know that as an institution? Unless, of course, you're an open university. But it's also the capacity for recognition, and much of it, what you try to do then, lifelong learning probably has to be done by inter-university exchanges as well. David mentioned national policies, and I think that's crucial, and this is also where we see key differences across Europe. Some systems have very supportive and enhancing policies, others less so. So I think this is really very important. And interestingly, we just see that after some time of silence, I would say, and inertia on this issue, in several of the EU member states, there is a renewed discussion and emerging approaches for lifelong learning. So I think it's actually a good time to explore this, not only for us, not only at national level, but also at European level. And we are also keen to look around globally and to compare and see what others are doing. It's not yet a big debate in Europe, but I think it's emerging. And maybe we have currently a lot of discussion on micro-credentials. You probably heard this already here, also in other sessions. And while the micro-credential might not bring the solution, I think for us it's a good opportunity to take the topic up and discuss that with several actors, including governments and employers. I think one point that is important here might be that we are growingly aware that we can't leave it to the market. I mean, it's not a question of demand and then this is provided, but that we really need to do something that is very much in line with the kind of higher education that we provide anyhow. So it's that we have public frameworks and we have public responsibilities for lifelong learning, for learning and teaching, for higher education learning and teaching. And that would also have to extend to lifelong learning. And to illustrate this as an example, one of the innovations that we have seen over the past decade were the MOOCs that came up, and where we, I mean, this is really nice what's happening there, but we felt also that universities have, they are not taking really the full benefit of it. A lot of it is hosted on for-profit platforms, and we should probably think of how we do that with our lifelong learning contribution. So these were my comments. Thanks.
Thank you very much. So just maybe a few comments on your presentation on the experience in Europe. And first of all, what you said about the fact that all kind of a dedicated instrument to promote lifelong learning. But at the same time, I think we see some universities now changing this approach by establishing an entity really dedicated to lifelong learning, but not as a side really structure, but really as an instrument with a transversal, capacity to mobilize and engage knowledge, expertise from the different faculties to actually serve the needs of different categories of learners and be closer to industry and to the community at large. So I think that these structural changes that we are seeing in how universities are actually responding to this demand is also, or can be a sign that they are taking that in a more holistic way and do no longer, at least for some of them, leave this at the margin. I think it's time for interaction with the room, and I'd like to remind you that we have also with us President Jia and Secretary Bonilla, who are connected, and we will be able also to respond to your questions. So I see a gentleman here at the back of the room, and there is a mic that will reach you. Please, if you could introduce yourself briefly.
Mi nombre es Luis Bonilla.
Luis Bonilla. I'm from the International Research Center Otras Voces de América Latina, from Latin America and the Caribbean, other voices in education. When we talk about education throughout life, there are two paradigms. One that seems to seek to constantly keep pace with innovation and to celebrate innovation. And so it's very difficult for us in universities with university curricula to keep pace with changing technologies. So it would be better to focus on needs to the marketplace and employability. So that's one paradigm. But there's the other paradigm for lifelong learning, which is conceived as a way of actually carrying out the program set forth in the futures of education. The climate crisis, democracy, all of these things require that we rethink universities as they currently stand, that have constantly been assigned with the task of updating people, keep people upskilled. But what about people who want to get training so that they can solve social problems, climate change, democracy? These are major human challenges. I'm very doubtful because, as I said, I hear a lot of people talking about adapting, but only to make people more employable. I think that what our challenges, because of the challenges we face, we have to do that, of course, but we also have to train people to address society's strategic challenges. Because not everybody who gets a diploma or somebody who's in in-service training, they're not just looking for a job. They want to build a better society. That's what UNESCO has defined quite clearly as the objective of education, teaching us how to live with one another, to share with one another, and to learn together how to build a society. So this paradigm for lifelong learning helps us create jobs, but also to improve the quality of people's lives and to transform society in a positive sense. Thank you. Secretary Bonilla, could you perhaps respond to that question that addresses a very important issue? What model of lifelong education are we thinking about? Education for social transformation to address today's current challenges, or to have a more narrow focus, focusing on the labor market? Thank you very much for that question. I think that I share many of the ideas that the questioner has referred to. We are coming out of a pandemic. In fact, we're still in the thick of it. This is a great opportunity for us to make changes in all of those areas where, for what we traditionally thought about education and the role of higher education institutes. I think that when we think about education throughout life, it's not something that's just designed to help people keep their skills honed so that they can get a job. No. We should have universities that are institutional education, educational institutes that are much more comprehensive, something that really focuses on an overarching objective, making it possible for young people to develop their own lifelong aspirations. And so we have to understand what they want. Often in universities, we have a set menu. And we try to, and this can vary in function of the teachers you have or whatever emphasis in any given field of research the university wants to put its money into and its energy into. But the young people might be interested in things like changing the climate, building better societies. They have other dreams and other aspirations. And I think that we should take this historic opportunity to develop an educational approach that makes it possible for people to believe in building a life project, something that they will not only gain knowledge as they need, but that will also have a deeper consciousness of the fact that we all share this planet. We want societies that are more inclusive, egalitarian, diverse. And so I think that this is the critical role that we governments have to play. When I say governments, I mean national governments, local governments, regional governments, municipal governments. We have to make sure that all of these institutes of higher education are actually in sync with the aspirations of young people in all of our societies. That's the real challenge before us. Thank you.
We're going to take another question.
No, thank you.
Yes, Madam.
Thank you. My name is Lisbeth Hens. I'm from the Ministry of Education and Training of the Flemish Community of Belgium. And in a few weeks' time, we will start, together with our higher education institutions, to develop a lifelong learning strategy for higher education. So I would like to ask the panelists, do you have a last word of advice before we start?
You two do that.
Yeah.
Michael, would you like to?
That's really good, because I'm having a count here. You are now the 4th European government, which I heard that they are developing a lifelong learning strategy. So you should talk to each other. Yeah, I heard I know about Sweden, Denmark, Norway is coming up with something. I heard this morning that England is providing something, and then Spain as well. Yeah, so that's what I think that's the really good news here. I mean, there is more momentum. I've just had a comment about the question before, if I may. I think you're absolutely right. It's not just for the labor market, and I think it has been made clear here that this is about really a broad way of understanding lifelong learning. But a lot of the labor market skills that are currently needed and will increasingly be needed will require what you actually just described. So there's growing demand for what you could call, in a jargon way, green skills. Yeah? And this is clearly where we see a role of universities, so to contribute to the transfer to the circular and green societies and economies.
Thank you, Michael. Any other comment or question from the floor? Yes, sir. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. My name is Javier Uceda. I'm director of the UNESCO Chair of University Policy and Management in Madrid, in the Technical University of Madrid. My comment is regarding the European policies that you talk about, the role played by the university currently and the activities we develop here and there regarding this topic. well, to some extent, what you had said is clearly what is happening now, but my perception is that all these things that, I mean, average, there are also very good examples where you can demonstrate how they do good things regarding this matter, but in general, my feeling is that we are just doing all these activities in a very low priority. It's something just at the bottom. So we are doing a lot of things together, but of course we have a number of priority in very higher position, and we are paying attention and just developing a strategic plans here and there are a lot of things, but long life learning is just at the bottom. And at the same time, so well, one figure that was given by a document regarding the industry in Europe, or the policy. It's a document from the European Commission, and they say that probably in the next 5 years we will need to upskill or re-skill 120 million people in Europe. So only just 120 million. That's just a few. And so my perception that we have to do something, and the government, the Belgian or this and that, we have to take this seriously. We have to define a clear strategy. Of course, the individual institution, well, and they have the autonomy, they can decide what to do, but at the end, so we need a strategy. If we don't have such kind of strategy, it's very difficult to cover all the needs, just from the point of view of the labor market, but also regarding the societal needs. And that's my comment regarding your statement or your comments, and well, that's to share my views.
Do you see any contradiction in what you say and what I said?
No, well,
No.
but I think that
Okay.
you feel more comfortable than I am regarding the situation. That's my perception. Well, you say,
no, I
okay,
don't
we
say
are
that I
doing-
feel comfortable about it. I mean, we have been following that for quite a while. As I said, around between 2008 and 2010-12, we were really optimistic. We thought that lifelong learning would become much more mainstreamed. Yeah? We also thought this of the level of education, because we thought school leavers need a different kind of education, much more flexible, you know, much more skills-oriented, learning outcome-oriented. We thought the same is basically true for the lifelong learners. So we saw that this would take in up much more space within the university. But then we didn't really see that happen. And I still think it has also something to do with how we present that and how we take it forward. I mean, from the cradle to the grave was probably not the most catchy slogan. But then to turn it all into, this is all about skills which you can acquire everywhere and you can somehow stake them together. I think this is where we lost our members when it came to that. And what I have seen I think it was almost the same everywhere in Europe. It moved out of higher education. If you look at the level of the European Commission nowadays, it's mainly in employment, actually, where the lifelong learning sits. And it's very much focused then on the vocational sector and not so much on higher education. And then it's really good news that this is changing in Flanders and in a couple of other places.
Yeah, I agree with that. So my idea is that we need action now. So that's the time for action. So, okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll take a last question, please. Here at the front.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah.
Is it on?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you. My name is George Penjero. I'm coming from Uganda, and I'm the Vice Chancellor of Gulu University, still a small public university in the country. But basically, I'm an adult educator, and I would like to come back to the tension that has already been generated around the concept of lifelong learning, and come back to the presentations that you've made and the finding in relation to the financing. And then we will see where we are going with the discourse of lifelong learning. In adult education, we say the formulation moving away from lifelong education to lifelong learning was hijacked by the market and a focus on skill. And you can see that is coming out quite clearly, and not lifelong education, with a completely different philosophy, just like you mentioned, the life-wide the life deep learning, not only lifelong, not cradle to grave, but life-wide, to include all aspects of current life, the change that we need in the society, the consciousness that needs to be developed. That has been the philosophy in adult education. But now when we come in lifelong learning and you see the findings from new study and it goes into the funding can only finance skills acquisition. That is where you talk of tuition. Because this other aspect of green skilling is not driven by market. And for as long as we depend on market, even the green skilling will not work. Because the issues of innovations, artificial intelligence, is driving people elsewhere. Tomorrow's cause for joblessness will not be the shrinking of the economy. It will be the hijacking of jobs by machineries and robots. And as lifelong learners, if I go back to that concept, we need to completely pay different attention to the trends, and not only climate change. Humanity is at stake with machineries. What is going to become of people when all the jobs are computerized? And I think this should be the mainstay of the learning, the life deep, the life wide. So, even if countries are adopting, especially the European countries, they are going on the skills, but they still have a danger ahead when machines will drive people out of the factories. The companies will find it easier to deal with things without souls. And I think this is the main preoccupation of us as human beings, as lifelong learners, to say this word belongs to human beings and not machines, and we should be redesigning it, reconfiguring it in a different direction than the direction market is taking us. Thank you.
Thank you for all this question. I would like to invite first Badol, if you want to comment on this, and then I will, for the last word, I'll return to Shanghai and ask President Jia also to comment on this dimension, on this point.
I think that the point raised by our colleague from the Latin American UNESCO office, also called Bonilla, is an important point, and this is what we're talking about. The way in which, and George has reinforced it here, the way in which this idea of adult education, or used to be called extramural studies, in the 19th century, all of that, which had to do with equipping citizens to play active roles in their communities and to play active roles on the subjects which were important in their communities. So if it had to do with, in a contemporary community, my community, for example, what are some of the issues that kind of lifelong learning, that kind of education would address? It would be addressing housing affordability, because young people, young families, they're priced out. They can't buy a house, they can't rent a house. The rental apartments have all been turned into Airbnbs. There's no space for them to go. You can be a student, that's a big issue. We have we have issues around the fisheries. The fisheries, because the fisheries are being, harvested by big ships that can scoop up so many fish, and then sell them at depressed prices. And so, where's the educational process? Where's the space to talk about the survival of the fisheries? We have in British Columbia, we have, some of you will have read it, we have now each summer, we live in a temperate climate. That means quite a lot of rain. But the climate change has shifted so much that we're having every summer huge forest fires. But when you look at what's being offered by by our own Department of Continuing Education, you don't find a course on solving innovation in housing affordability. You don't find a course on listening to indigenous approaches to fishing to establish an equilibrium so we don't take too many fish. You don't find courses on adaptation to avoid forest fires. So because why don't we? Because the people that don't have any money for housing, they don't have money for continuing the studies. The people who don't have money because they've got no employment because all of the fishing is gone, they're broke. They can't. So this is where public investment. This is where this kind of thing where public monies need to be put into this form of education, so that we're not just one-legged lifelong learning, the market leg. We've got to walk on, as we say, you've got to walk on two legs. And so we need investment. We need governments. Now, when you're starting to talk, in Belgium on your policy, keep some of these things. Don't just look at the trends. In other countries, you're going to find they're all doing market. Start thinking about, as our colleague from Latin America said, start looking at what the real issues are, among people who are not in the center, not the ones that are benefiting, these days, the ones that are marginalized, anonymous, and what do they need?
Thank you. Yeah. But I think that's a nice way of actually addressing an important message. And for the last word, I'd like to return to Shanghai and give the floor to President Jia. If the connection is still open. Yes, it is. Professor Jia, you have the floor.
好。 非常感谢这个给我
Thank you very much for offering me this opportunity. The participants have touched a few topics. As for the position of lifelong learning, is somewhat different from the school education in China, which just provide the degree education. As for the employment after graduation, this providing very great evidence. So in China, we would require our own children to learn more to change their fate. So up until now in China, we have attached a great importance to degree education, while for LLL, after graduation, we want to improve ourselves. So it's kind of aspiration for continued learning to realize the triple-L. So we need to have such kind of reflection for the economic and social development. It's quite fast, especially with AI, big data, 5G, internet technologies. It has accelerated iteration of the economy. Some traditional skills cannot adapt to the social and economic development. Amid such kind of backdrop, we have our space to develop lifelong learning. We need to make joint efforts in the following aspects. First, the governments. For triple-L, it's kind of a public asset. The governments should provide such kind of products. So their investment in education is very fundamental. They need to play the leading role. As for SOU, among our funding source, above 60 or 70% is from the government funding. The others are from the tuitions or some social capital. So the government should play a very crucial role. Secondly, as for the funding, we need to give full play to the enterprises. In Chinese policies, we also have this kind of social added fee. They need to extract some fee to the government as the fund to train their employees. How to leverage this kind of fund? It's supervised by different stakeholders. Our university can also utilize the fund to provide training for the enterprises. Thirdly, from the student tuitions, because our target for lifelong learning, they will seek a job after graduation, and they need to spend some time for continuing learning, and the fund can come from different sources from the society. So we need to encourage them to participate in it. We need to have diversified funding sources. What's more, in order to adapt to the social and economic development, the curriculum development should adapt to the market trend. So in China, we also attach great importance to the industry and academic integration. What is their demand from the industries? We can also provide the internship to the students. We also perfect our curriculum and programs so that they can facilitate the learners and they can have practical skills and knowledge. So definitely we should need the support from the industry. And besides, we also need to leverage our resources from the academia so that we shall have some programs of a vision. We can also meet the demands from the industry. So industry academic integration is also one of our priorities. This is the sharing from me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, President Jia. I'd like to thank you and all speakers, Secretary of Education, Bonilla, Michael Goebel, but all for your contributions to this discussion and to the debate. I'd like to thank all the participants for their engagement, including, of course, the participants online. And to end, I would like to give a last message to actually invite those who would like to go deeper into the subjects to another session that we're organizing on the same topic tomorrow, but that one will be dedicated to actually presenting and discussing specific case studies. So again, well, you're welcome to that session, and I would like also to mention the fact that UL is launching a policy paper on this topic. I think that would be very relevant to the countries which are actually reflecting on how to put in place a policy and a framework to promote the engagement of universities in lifelong learning. This policy paper is available online on the UL website. So once again, thanks to all, and we are looking forward to further interaction with you during the rest of the conference. Thank you, and thanks again to Secretary of Education Bonilla and to President Jia.
Thank you very much.
particular, this panel will focus on the pedagogies that we bring into the classrooms. My name is Mette Morsing, and I've, since the last 2 years, been heading PRIME, Principles for Responsible Management Education, based in New York in the United Nations Global Compact Office. Before that, I was a professor in various institutions, such as Stockholm School of Economics and Copenhagen Business School. I was also, in both places, the executive director of research centers on sustainable development and what we then used to call corporate social responsibility. So I've been there for the past more than 20 years in the classrooms. I've been doing my research on responsible management and been very interested to see the development that has occurred over the past 20 years or so. I think it's fair to say that the world, including business schools, have indeed taken a step up to engage much more on this agenda. So it's an exciting agenda, but as we know, there's still a lot of room for improvement. With me here today, I have my prominent panel here. Maybe I should have positioned you there in order to my slide up here, but I didn't. Anyway, I have here a distinct panel here with me. I'm super proud to have this in-person participation of such people with such expertise from business, from the dean's perspective, from the professor perspective, and not least from the student perspective. So here I have with me John Goodwin. I'll just say my panel will be introduced a little more firmly after a few slides that I would like to share with you. But first I have here John Goodwin, who was the CEO of the Lego Foundation, and before that the Chief Financial Officer for the Lego Company. And John is also spending a lot of time, as much as I can tempt him to do, to work with us in PRIME right now, helping us to work with pedagogies for leadership education. Welcome, John.
Thank you.
With me here I also have Laura Nestares, and Laura is a student at ISADA here in the local neighborhood, and a school that has done a lot and has been one of the leading schools from way back research-wise, also within the space of responsible management. But Laura is also the distinct president of Oikos, and for those of you who don't know Oikos, it's a world-spanning student organization working with sustainable development. And Laura has also joined PGS, the PRIME Global Students, I'm proud to say. So warm welcome to you, Laura.
Hello.
And here I have my third prominent guest here today is Daniel Trachas, and Daniel is a professor and a dean of Nova Business School in Portugal. And Nova is a long-standing, and so are you, Daniel, a long-standing supporter of PRIME, Principles for Responsible Management Education, and has been working a lot to integrate responsible management and what does sustainability mean into the classrooms of the students, not just at Nova, but also in your prior work with INSEAD and in your visiting professorships with that school as well. You are also a professor based in economics, so I think that is also something that I warmly see as a development. This was not the case 20 years ago, that we have had a chief financial officer and a professor of business economy so strongly engaging on this agenda. So a warm welcome to you also, Daniel. Thank you.
Thank you.
And finally, on my panel here today, I have Sumitra Dutta, and a dean-elect at SAID at Oxford University in England. And you are also the founding dean, actually, at the business school, the S.C. Johnson Business School at Cornell in the United States. You have also engaged with the UN, actually, on a number of other issues, developing indexes, for example, an index on innovation that I am keen to learn and much more from into the future. So a warm welcome to you also, Dmitra. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
So I'd like to use the opportunity also just to warmly welcome all of you who took the hour and a half out here today to be with us and to listen to us and to reflect with us, and hopefully also to challenge us a little bit here in the panel. I would like to just raise you quickly your hands, because I would like to know, not you individually, but just to know how many of you daily work are within a business, within a company. A couple, thank you. Some. And how many of you work with governments? NG. There's a discussion. Your government. Yes, thank you. And NGOs. Yeah, thank you. And higher education initiatives. Thank you so much. So the little sort of information for us about where you come from and your interest in this particular area, of course. So what we'll spend this roundtable on is to focus on the need and challenges, as I said before, on sort of the pedagogical side of things. I mean, some of you may have been exposed to a professor like myself, someone who has been in the classroom.